Thanks, Abby, for the introduction, and good morning, everyone. And today I'm going to talk about genetic semantic security against a kleptographic adversary. I'm Qiang, and this joint work with Alex Russell, Moti Yang, and Hongshem Zhou. So we are now actually facing a crypto crisis. Not only we need to worry about quantum computer, which may appear tomorrow by the newspaper, and we also need to worry about the big brothers. Actually, there is a huge gap between the nice and rigorously analyzed specification and the thing actually we are using every day, which is the implementation. So kleptography was developed by Adam Young and Moti Young back in the 90s. It is essentially the science of stealing information subliminally from black box implementations. So a very simple example can be seen as follows. Suppose we use a package or API generating a sequence of randomness. Supposedly, they should pop up random bits one by one or blocks by block. But if the implementation or the package is actually maliciously implemented or subverted, it may contain some backdoor. And using this backdoor to allow special instructions. For example, a simple way to subvert this randomness generation is just only sample the first block of randomness uniformly, then compute all the rest just by applying a pseudo-random function. So and output this new sequence of bits. So obviously, whoever has this backdoor can trivially tell the sequence he received is not truly random because I have a clear structure can be determined by this backdoor z. But to anybody else, this sequence looks perfectly good. We can even prove such sequence cannot be distinguished by anyone from the truly uniform bits. And this type of theory was actually invented 20 years ago, but it was never taken so seriously by our community. And suddenly, after 2 decades, this gentleman tells the world actually cryptography can be implemented in real life. Actually, in the Snowden revelation, there's a clear example of dual EC pseudo-random generator that carries out exactly this type of attack. But what's worse is that actually this type of attack was not only true in textbook, but also have serious real-world consequences. In a bunch of very nice follow-ups, people start exploring the actual possibility of exploring this weakness of DOEC in the real-world secure protocols and also in the real-world security devices. So what's the real threat of such kind of attack? Well, bad guys supply malicious implementation. Such malicious implementation may leak private information. This might not sound to be so surprising because that's what normally bad guys want to do. They want to steal something. But this can be done in a way that the output distribution of a subverted implementation actually can look perfectly good or as generated by the specification. So this essentially renders black box testing impossible. So the attacker's goal in this setting is actually twofold. On the one hand, the attacker wants to subvert the implementation and try to break the security. But on the other hand, the attacker tried to keep the subversion under the detection, under the radar of any black box testing. We call such kind of attacker malicious but proud attacker. So things actually become even worse after the Snowden revelation. Our community started to react. Starting from the nice paper from Blair Patterson and Rogaway, they enlarged the scope of such kind of kleptographic attack. In particular, a special type of attack was investigated in randomized encryption. So an attacker can use a subverted randomized encryption to generate a subliminal channel, but just exploring the public channel, which contains just a ciphertext, and can leak secret exclusively to the attacker only. So essentially, the attacker who sees the ciphertext can directly read some secret out, but to everybody else, it's just a perfect ciphertext. This can be done conceptually directly connect to another subject called steganography. The subverted implementation essentially uses this public channel as a covert text to contain the actual secret he tries to embed. And this can be done easily by doing rejection sampling because there are randomness here. And what's worse, again, to anybody else who does not have the backdoor, the output ciphertext looks perfectly good. People can even prove that they are statistically close. So because the wide universality of such kind of bad randomness attack or subliminal channel attack, so this renders the progress on defenses less of the satisfactory. So essentially, there are three major types of defense currently. Of course, there are many other works considering different primitives and mainly focus on encryption here. So first line work, because of randomized encryption is so universal and so easy to plan the subliminal channel, it's suggested in a sequence of work that maybe let's forget about it. Let's focus on deterministic algorithms. And a line of work start to developing parallel theory of deterministic encryption in different settings. And also another line of nice work assuming a an interesting model called a reverse firewall. They re-randomize every incoming and outgoing communication, try to flatten the output distribution of the malicious implementation so that essentially they diffuse the subliminal channel. And another line work was developed by us, and we call it Kleptography, which means clipping the power of Kleptographic attacks. We permit every functional component to be subverted, but we only consider how to mitigate the subliminal channel in the randomized key generation, not exactly eliminating them. So the standard for defending against the encryption, defend encryption against the subliminal channel or such kind of kleptographic attack, essentially have quite many drawbacks. First, if we assume we're only considering deterministic algorithms, but key generation has always to be randomized. So we have to assume key generation component to be trusted. And if we consider deterministic encryption only, essentially renders the standard IND-CPA security for public encryption unachievable. Also for correctness, which the previous work handled by assuming something called the decryptability condition, essentially said every ciphertext generated by a subverted encryption algorithm should be decryptable by a trusted decryption component. This needs to be justified actually by a very strong uh, watchdog we introduced as an actual terminology. And for the reverse firewall, it's a very conceptually very interesting. Actually, enables a very general class of feasibility, but it has to assume the randomness used and the re-randomization operation to be trusted. And again, what we do for mitigating subliminal channel doesn't really kill the whole thing. It might still leak 1 bit or 2 bits. It already begin bad enough for encryption. So this left us the major open problem that how can we achieve the standard IND-CPA security for public encryption without relying on the trusted randomness or those trusted modulars? First, of course, we need to say what do we mean by IND-CPA security in the cryptographic setting. We introduced a general definitional framework in previous work. So here we can simply adapt it here in the encryption setting. Since, as I mentioned, the attacker now is malicious and also proud. So the goal is twofold. So just reverse the goal of adversary. Either let exist an actual entity of our we call watchdog. The watchdog who has the specification can take the implementation and interrogates it, just doing the black box testing, trying to see whether the implementation is bad or not. And then the cryptographic game will be adapted a little bit by the challenger here has to use all the malicious implementation supplied by the attacker instead of doing everything himself and play the traditional cryptographic game with the attacker. Now we simply instantiate this cryptographic game with IND-CPA security, then we get the crypto version of IND-CPA security. Of course, so the goal is that either the watchdog can detect by doing black box testing, or the CPA security can be preserved even using this adjusted security game. And of course, there are more other versions of definition due to for technical building blocks. I refer, if you are interested, I suggest you to read the paper. Then first thing we need, let's try the simple idea. The subliminal channel attack is due to the reason you use bias randomness, right? So let's think how, what if we decompose the encryption algorithm into two parts? So randomness generation and the deterministic part of the encryption. That's actually how people do in practice. Whenever you need randomness, you call some library. Because this R can be bad, right? That's how about we hash it using a perfectly good hash function which can be modeled as a run oracle. Unfortunately, it's easy to see that the subliminal channel attack can be easily generalized to this setting. The reason is quite simple. Because this component of randomness generation, this single package is still malicious. They can take this two parts into account by doing the rejection sampling condition. For example, whenever this bad package of randomness generates samples of randomness, he's gonna pre-compute the ciphertext, and by embed checking whether the ciphertext always embeds a bit 0 in it, for example. So this to us to a couple of observations. So the modern cryptography starts essentially from Goldwas and Micheli. They developed the central notion of semantic security, and the one simple and clean message they deliver is that any deterministic encryption and stateless can never be IND-CPA secure. That's in the textbook for every grad student. Well, essentially here we're facing another obstacle. So any black box use of randomized encryption again cannot be IND-CPA secure in the kleptographic setting because of this biased randomness attack or subliminal channel. Actually, we can go even one step further. So not only black box use of the randomized encryption, however, we decompose the randomized encryption as long as we use the randomness package itself as a black box. It always renders subliminal channel attack possible. It can always launch such kind of steganographic attack. But this actually echoes a well-recognized the principle in security practice that monoculture is bad for security. So because of this observation, so the ramification is that essentially it looks like hopeless to preserve the standard IND-CPA security. That also justifies why previous work want to turn to public deterministic encryption or introduce actual component. It looks like just using the randomness generation as it is seems hopeless to have IND-CPA secure public encryption. But don't worry too much. Actually, cryptographers like this like seemingly impossible cases because that's normally how many of the crypto primitives are achieving seemingly paradoxical tasks. But inspired by those impossibility, then and also very widely used conventional wisdom in security practice is the modular design and independent execution. So this is widely used in crypto engineering, general and software engineering for testing, designing, very widely used principle. Instead of using the randomness package as one single black box, let's consider we have a two package or two different API, and we execute these two packages independently, and we're gonna mix the output of these two different package with a hash function. Now we can actually prove, even though all those components may be maliciously generated, but as long as we design the specification in this modular way and ensure the independent execution of these two modulars, we can prove the output of this hash actually can be uniform even to the attacker. So in this way, we can safely use all these components, even though all of them are subverted, safely as they are trusted implemented. So in this way, we can actually destroy the subliminal channel in subverted implementation completely. This resembles some similarity in the theoretical work of randomness extraction. Like, for example, whenever some random source does not have enough entropy, we're going to introduce another source. Maybe combine them together, we can get some good randomness. It's indeed very similar, but we are facing in a more adversarial setting that first, all the sources are provided by adversary arbitrarily. They're only under the black box testing. And second, all the components, even the extraction or whatever we call here, itself can be adversarially implemented. So once we have this general tool of destroying the subliminal channel, now suddenly we go from hell to heaven. And let me explain a little bit about the intuition, why it works. So first, because of the offline watchdog checking, at least we can ensure the output of this randomness generation to be somehow unpredictable. So if the output is easily predictable, then the watchdog can just run it again, and easily find a collision, which is not the case for truly random, uh, 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 u- uh, truly random sources. Well, also because the major reason of the attack in the subliminal channel, because the malicious sources can do rejection sampling, but they also need to essentially think all the components and try to influence the final output of the whole system. But now in the whole system, there's always one component. The output is kind of unpredictable. That means for any individual a bad random source, they cannot coordinate, they cannot have the full picture of the actual output of the system. Thus, they cannot embed the rejection sampling into the rejection sampling condition. Of course, we can also view this double splitting as kind of a special super duper extraction. But let's take a closer look of this modular design principle. So first, in classical cryptography, when we design an encryption scheme, we need a key generation, we need an encryption algorithm. Whenever we run encryption algorithm, essentially we first run key generation first and get a message from somewhere and run the randomness generation, or just call the package or call the API, and then feed all this information to the encryption algorithm, right? But now what we do is actually just simply bring down the modular design principle lower to the algorithm layer. So now these three components is actually only mimicking the key generation here. So instead of have one single key generation, we're going to have three components: randomness generation, two part of randomness generation, and the deterministic part try to interfere with the bad randomness. So in principle, there's really no difference with the regular modular design in the primitive level and the modular design principle in our algorithm level. And more importantly, actually, such kind of assumption or principle was already implicit in all previous work. Because whenever you have a trusted component, this trusted component has to be independent with the subverted component. They can never be tangled together. Right? Well, of course, people might, especially this is CCS, maybe a lot of system people, they may ask, is it easy to instantiate? So here I can give you a couple of examples, but maybe there are better ways you can come up with. So the first one is actually simple. Say we run the two components in different virtual machine, and this machine may be even backed up by Intel SGX. So the Intel SGX here is not trusted for storing some secret. The only goal is try to ensure the isolation. Of course, you can even try to use physically isolated source. For example, you have an in-house randomness generation bad package, and you also have one from the NIST beacon or whatever. Then mix them together, you're gonna get a nice randomness. There could be many other ways to realize it. Actually, this our methodology actually motivates a question for security engineering researchers. Can we realize a better architecture for reassemble those components to ensure the isolation and the right information flow? With this nice tool to completely destroy the subliminal channel, the implication is actually very nice. So first, we can actually clean malicious randomness generation. This was shown in a nice work of Doris et al. It's impossible to apply any public function to the output of one single instance of pseudorandom generation. So now instead of running the malicious randomness generation once, we just run this one instance twice independently. Then we can get good randomness out, still reusing the bad source as a black box. And we can get the first public bit encryption to preserve IND-CPA security. Why we call it bit here, you're gonna see very soon. And of course, a general tool to destroy subliminal channel. So let's see how what's the specification gonna look like in a bit encryption, public bit encryption. So first, the key generation gonna be decomposed into 4 components. The key part is the randomness generation needs to be 2 independent modular. Then this is the immunizing function. Normally, it could be a hash function, could be something else. And this is actual deterministic part, taking a random coin to generate actual public secret key pair. Well, for encryption algorithm, here I did a sloppy job, but actually every package here is already split out in the several components. So they take the output of this package and the output of this another package of key and take 1 bit of the message. Because the message space is small, essentially to guard consistency of this deterministic part of the encryption algorithm, then the watchdog can essentially brute force all the possible message and run this two package to feed to do the testing for public input distribution. So if we design the specification of a public key bit encryption as before, we can actually have a theorem that the specification designed above actually preserved IND-CPA security in the cryptographic setting, but assume the specification of the hash is a run oracle, not implementation. The implementation can be still subverted. We can also deal with the standard model, get rid of this run oracle assumption, but we need to go to a less efficient construction. I would like to say a little bit more about the general modular design principle, and we call it split program framework here. So we know that, but by doing purely black box testing, is essentially hopeless because there are all kind of attacks and impossibilities, and also kind of hopeless to rely on purely source code analysis because the functionality grows and the complexity grows. Doing source code analysis in general is also an impossible task. What we do is actually reduce the complex task of doing source code analysis on the functional component to actually one much simpler single component of reassembly functionality. All we need to ensure is that we have some piece of code that can securely combine a bunch of components and ensure the right information flow. So, and people, when this type of piece of code is provided, people can do source code analysis just solely on this type of functionality. And then all the other functional component will be used as a black box. So this type of hybrid model actually may shed light on the general specification design. And modular design is known to be good for secure engineering for a long, long time. And our work here essentially deliver another message. So modular design principle, as simple as it is also powerful enough to actually be good for defending against the backdoor. Can possibly eliminate all this challenge on backdoors. But as I said, we only claim a bit encryption, right? We haven't claimed the general public encryption yet. Why? Actually, the reason is very simple. There's another even simpler attack you can imagine when you subvert an implementation. Suppose whenever an algorithm with input a certain message, you directly output the secret. Then in the encryption setting, for whenever you encrypt a particular trigger message, you directly output the message. Then essentially that's hopeless to have any security of this type of encryption algorithm. And also, nobody can find such subversion by doing black box testing. You can choose a random trigger. And previously, this type of threat was handled exactly by the decryptability assumption. And so what we learned so far is that for public encryption with large input, essentially the encryption algorithm can never be exposed to the naked input. Otherwise, any input could be potentially a trigger to pull this secret out. And this actually closely related to a line of seminal work called self-correcting programs, which in that area really take a buggy implementation, which was inconsistent at a small portion of input, turning it into another implementation that is correct at every point with overwhelming probability. So the key observation is that we need to transform this unknown input supplied by the adversary to a known input distribution. The simple idea is that instead of encrypting message as it is, can we transform it to be a random message? So instead of encrypting M, we're first gonna map it to a random places by XOR with R. So this R can be generated using malicious randomness, handled by the modular design principle. Then encrypting M prime instead, then you get the ciphertext, and you can tune the decryption algorithm accordingly. So now we need this actual trusted component of this XOR, but this can come from the computing base or the CPU. So the final public encryption algorithm should look like this: the randomness generation, the random message generation, and the actual deterministic part of the encryption algorithm. And the trusted component here is the XOR and the information flow. Now we can finally claim something real. We get the first public encryption achieving the standard semantic security by assuming the specification design as before in the Kleptographic setting or in the Cliptographic setting, essentially similar meaning. And we also have a better symmetric encryption as the standard of security because previously either they assume trusted the key generation or you have to rely on the uh, uh, decryptability assumption. And we get pseudorandom generator as well. And all those done actually essentially with essential minimum trust on the end user. All the user needs to do just run the reassembly thing and use all the component as black box. So the quick summary here is that it's indeed actually possible to say randomized algorithm against subversion by just simply doing a specification design. Actually, we didn't change the underlying algorithm at all, right? Suppose you like someone prefers RSA, someone prefers Algamma, you can still keep your preference. All we need to change is whenever you implement, you need to inform the implementation provider, give me several modulars, but underlying algebraic structure, do whatever you like. And actually, many conventional wisdom is very helpful. We in this paper we show that modular design is helpful. In previous paper, we also demonstrate something called nothing in my sleeve is very helpful, and there are more things. We might should work closer with the security community together to figure out better solutions. And the landscape might change for cryptography when we have this one more dimension. Maybe many classical results needs worth revisiting. And there are many, many other open problems. We may talk more offline if you're interested. Thank you.
You took the approach of still having the algorithm randomized, but having more than one source. What about having just supplying the randomness externally? So my input to the algorithm would be the randomness and the plain text, for example, and then I can use multiple sources. Why would that be a less preferable approach?
Do have a trusted random source. I guess one nice approach is already proposed by Evgeny et al. Using the reverse firewall. So you can re-randomize every incoming outgoing communication. Actually, what we consider here is that the random source is also some component provided by other people, right? It's not something reliable. And there's another challenge is that even if you have trusted random source, there's still trigger. We still need to deal with the large message. We need to shift it around somehow. Actually, that's a very nice question. So current technique actually cannot handle CCA because the reason is due to the trigger. So the trigger attack looks extremely simple, but it turns out to be much more harder to defend. So we need to do more things. Actually, we are working on it. Well, yeah, you can see that you can use the ciphertext as another trigger to launch attack, right? When you make a decryption query, you get the security out. But for CCA security, you cannot rely on the random homomorphic property to fresh it out.